In today's video, I'm heading over from mainland Scotland to the Outer Hebrides, into a largely ignored area of wilderness on the Isle of Lewis. It's squashy, rocky, sunny, and I celebrate the anniversary of a special event that came to this island the first time I visited many years ago. My name's Feargus, and this is the middle of nowhere. This is the butt. Not that one. It's the butt of Lewis. I'm on the Isle of Lewis, which is at the top of the Outer Hebrides. And this is the most northerly point on the island chain, having crossed the sea from Ullapool, where I live. And I'm going to be walking that way, hopefully reaching the little village of Tarbert, which is the capital of the Isle of Harris, which is actually the same island, but for some reason is called the Isle of Harris as a separate island. Anyway, it's a lovely spot. A bit too touristy for me though. So basically this is an unusually grassy spot for Lewis, because most of what I'm going to be walking over the next few days is quite a bit different. The Isle of Lewis is predominantly a great big bog. And that puts off most people coming to these parts. And it's pretty tiring going across this bog, because you get these trenches and channels that have been worn into the peat by eons of rain. And the peat, which forms a blanket over the gravel and the bedrock below, is only 2 or 3 meters deep in most places. But it took thousands of years to form from the remains of plants and animals, which just piled up and up and up faster than the conditions were able to cause them to decay. This is one of the most extensive areas of it in Britain. And actually, globally, it's quite a rare habitat. My favourite and quite small and unassuming things about the bog are the sundews, like this one here. They're really quite small and unassuming, and this one is actually bigger than most. These are just smaller versions of the kind of sundews and other carnivorous plants that you get in other parts of the world that eat insects for the most part. And they're prodigious consumers of things like midges. And if you take a close look at the leaves, in many cases you can see the partially digested remains of some what used to be flying insects that got stuck. Fall of Muirneig. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm probably wrong. It's the highest point for miles around. So I've got a pretty good view. From the trig point up there, I can see all the way to the butt of Lewis, where I came from, which is now about 15 kilometers away. Down there is Stornoway, capital of Lewis and the Hebrides in general. And it's quite a nice spot to spend the night. Not particularly high, only about 250 meters, but that's quite a lot for North Lewis. So, after a very tiring and squishy day's walking, it's about time I had some rest. It's 4:30 in the morning, and I've got up just for a little bit because I wanted to see the sun come up. And very surprisingly, considering how dull it is, there's a little gap just on the horizon, and I can see it. I wanted to be here this morning because it's 20 years to the day since the last time I was here. And I was here with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, and we were here to see a really, really incredible event, an eclipse of the sun. Only at the far northwest tip of Scotland and out here on the Isle of Lewis was this eclipse fully visible as an annular eclipse. So the moon passed directly in front of the sun, but because the moon's orbit is elliptical, it wasn't a total eclipse. So about half the time in its orbit around the Earth, the moon is close enough to completely cover the sun, but during the other half, the moon is a little bit further away, so when it passes in front of the sun, it looks a little bit smaller than the sun. So even if it goes directly in front of it, there is a ring of sunlight all the way around the moon with a black hole in the middle, which is the moon itself. And that's what happened here on the last day of May in 2003.
Not sure if you can hold it steady. 1 second.
Wow.
Come on.
Ah, it's going again. There.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Really cool.
Surreal. Oh, we're going to lose it in the cloud bank now.
Oh, God, we're lucky.
So there you have it. When I was a sprightly 25-year-old and Aoife, my wife, was 22, and I dragged her across the bog because I thought this hill would be an excellent place to watch the event. She was cursing me over and over because of the squishiness and getting wet feet. That's funny. Now I'm going back to bed. At this point you may be wondering what has possessed me to spend several days trudging across the stinking, festering bog as far as the eye can see. Well, there isn't really a simple answer. I mean, normally this kind of terrain is the sort of stuff that I'm cursing as I cross it to reach the mountains beyond. But to be truthful, I wanted to get a sense for the habitat for its own sake. And it is a habitat which is relatively rare around the world. It's an important carbon sink, for one thing, because there's a huge amount of carbon stored up under my feet in the couple of meters of peat from the plants which have died over the last few millennia. But also after that trip in 2003, I was left with this niggling urge to do this, which I've been holding on to for years, to get an idea of the scale of the vast bog. It is hard work though. It's really hard work because it's so spongy and squelchy. Going south in Lewis, and the character of the landscape has begun to change. It's a lot greener, and the bog seems to contain much thinner levels of peat. There's a lot more exposed rocks, and it's a land of increasing amounts of water all around me. It's nice to be out in the wilderness, but God, does it feel good when you take the weight off your legs and your shoulders. Oh, I've been having a pretty hard time yesterday and today because my muscles, I'm using muscles that I don't think I normally use very much because of the spongy nature of the ground. It's very different from hiking on solid paths or even on firm grass. Oh, can't stay here long though. I've actually got a nice place and I gotta go up the hill above for the sunset. It's taken 4 days, but finally I found a place which will get some good photographs of the Isle of Lewis. Oh. Lovely, almost red light that you get just before the sun goes down. that's what I gotta make the most of. So I'm scanning intensely for foreground interest. God, that's beautiful. What I'm doing here is I'm making a panorama of this nice shadow effect after the sun goes down. So I take multiple pictures and then I stitch them together. If you've ever wondered what that deep blue below the kind of pinky band is, that is actually the shadow of the earth. Because the sun has gone down below the horizon, everything below that, all of the haze, is now out of the sunlight, whereas the pink band is still hitting the sun. So the shadow is cast on the lower layers. It's so quiet. I love the long summer evenings. It's 11 o'clock at night. Good morning. Today the breeze that has been around for the last few days is gone, and in its place a cloud of hate and suffering has erupted from the bog to surround my tent. So I'm stuck in here until I'm ready to face it. There are a few living things in the world which I despise and abhor, but midges have to be one of them. They are the smallest little flies, but when you do get them, in places like this especially, where it's wet and boggy, they come in such numbers that it's absolutely horrible. They're like a cloud of blood-sucking horribleness. Thankfully, the wind keeps them from flying because they're so small. So I'm hoping, if I wait long enough, and actually just as I'm speaking, the wind is starting to blow. So let's hope before I get up. One thing I haven't mentioned so far is that the rocks here are more than just a pretty picture. These are the oldest rocks in Britain and some of the oldest rocks in Europe. They've been radiometrically dated to be between 2.9 and 3 billion years old. That's 3,000 million years. Long before there was any life on the land. And they've been metamorphosed, so they're not chemically exactly the same as they were when they formed, but they haven't been melted ever since their formation. Out in a place like this, where there's bits of lichen and other weathering, it's a bit harder to see the very characteristic banding of this so-called Lewisian gneiss. But when the light is low, when the sun is low, striking it at a shallow angle, you can see it better. And where I was really able to see it was at the very start, at the butt of Lewis, where there are sheer cliffs and all the salt spray prevents things like lichen from getting a root hold. So you can really see the twisting and contorting, and it's amazing. It's so crazy to think about that I'm sitting on a rock which is 2/3 of the age of the planet. Anyhow, that is it from me. Today I've just got a couple of hours to walk to the road to the south. It's about 3 kilometers away, and then it's back on the boat. I was gonna keep going until tomorrow, but I feel like I've seen the bog now. I'll come back another time and have a look at the higher mountain areas to the south there.